our very first subject that we're covering on this podcast is going to be something that a lot of people use all the time, and it's becoming more and more prevalent as more hobbyists are using the low nutrient system, which is try to bring your nutrients down, bring your phosphates down, and bring your nitrates down. So the first thing we're going to do is let's cover, okay, what is a low nutrient system? You know, why do we want one? What are the benefits of a low nutrient system? And then we'll cover how to achieve that. So I'm going to introduce Dave, our owner of CoralVue, first, because he's probably, Dave he's the owner of CoralVue, and CoralVue has been around for almost
23 years now.
23 years. And
Yep.
Dave, how long have you been in the hobby?
Oh man, I started this when I was about 8 years old, Carlos. It started with fresh water, but it still has a lot of the same, problems or challenges that you can see in the
Okay.
marine side. But talking about nutrients today, and man, you talk about one of the biggest challenges we have in our hobby, and just trying to you need to keep the reef fed and the fish fed, but you got to get this waste removed some kind of way, and it's not always through mechanical filtration such as protein skimmers, and we need to bring in some other type of media or means to remove waste from our aquariums. So one of those being is GFO, or Granular Ferric Oxide, and a lot of people are using this product, and it does work, and it's one of the many tools that we have at our disposal that can solve problems for us.
Fantastic. So now let me go ahead and introduce Jeremy Meadows right here. So Jeremy Meadows has been around the hobby for a long time.
Yeah,
I know that
Just a little bit.
he's our salesperson, and at the end of the day, also Jeremy, you've been around since '90s, and just tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about you and your history.
A lot of people know my mom around the industry. She's Joy that runs Reef Bright. When we first started this, it was actually where I met Carlos when I was a teenager. We had one of the largest and one of the first online livestock websites for the industry, Harbor Aquatics. People all over the country knew us pretty well. We brought in coral, we brought in actual live rock, and we sold it on the internet. We sold it to locals. Carlos was one of the locals that would come in from Chicago. We were actually based out of Northwest Indiana, and we would bring in shipments direct from overseas. It'd fly directly in Chicago, and we would bring all that stuff in and introduce it into the industry. We were actually one of the first companies to import monoporic apicornis into the industry. So there's a lot of cool things that my parents did. I grew up in it. I learned a lot, and then started branching off. Did aquarium service for a while in Indianapolis. Moved to Dallas. Worked for a couple companies out there doing livestock. Worked for a pretty well-known company out there called Planet Aquariums in DFW, and did a lot for them. Opportunity came up about a year and a half ago to jump on the CoralVue team, and I thought it would be a great opportunity. And had a couple friends over here like Carlos, so jumped on board.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Jeremy, I remember, God, man, it's like, was it 25 years ago or so? It's every weekend driving over to taking about a 40-minute drive from Chicago all the way to Northwest Indiana. And then we just sit in there and let's be honest, sit in there, drink a lot of beer. He wouldn't drink beer, but we did.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I was a little young.
It was a little young, but we did. We drank a lot of beer. But I do remember those good old times when you used to bring the shipment of rock would come in all the way, usually from Walt Smith, would just come in, and there were boxes and boxes and boxes, and then we would just go down there, bring in old clothes, you put in gloves, You get some
Yeah.
brushes, like brush, and then you just grab the rocks and start, scrubbing, grabbing anything that was dead that you remove. If you found anything cool, you throw it in a bucket and it was yours to keep, things like that. And then we just and the troughs of live rock, and I'm talking about real live rock, not the dry stuff that or the man-made stuff that you put in the ocean and then you take it out 6 months later and call it live rock. It wasn't that. It was real live rock back in those days.
Well, and that was the one thing that was so Walt Smith was our main supplier, and his directions from were to get the rock, pull it
Mhm.
out of the water, put it in a box, and get it on the first flight over to Chicago.
Yep.
So a lot of this rock was only out of the water 48 hours.
Yeah.
So all the life on this rock was crazy. You would see corals and crabs and manna shrimp. We had octopus coming over in these rocks.
Yeah.
And they just show up in the tank. All of a sudden, one day there'd be an octopus in the tank.
Wow.
Fish. There were fish in
Yeah,
there. I mean, they would grab the rocks and then just grab newspapers and paper and just get wet paper and just put it on top of the rocks to keep that moisture in there. And they would just show up. The type of macroalgae, the type of microalgae that we would get, and it's like, or the color of the coralline algae
Yeah.
and
yeah,
the thickness of the coralline algae that you would see back in those days. It's fantastic, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I miss
Yeah.
about those
yeah.
old days
Me
that
too.
a lot of people have never seen, and they have no idea, you know and I know
And
there's the big store out there kind of started the clean white line because they wanted that. But just like anything else, there's some benefits, but then there's a lot of things that you lose.
well, there was a lot of filtration that rock had
Yeah.
because it was what truly filtered the ocean. Like this rock
Yeah.
is what filtered all these reefs. So, there was so much more biodiversity back then
Exactly.
because there we were truly bringing in a part of the ocean.
Hmm.
So there wasn't as much focus on, filtration back then with GFO and some of the other methods because the rock and the natural filtration was so good.
Yeah.
Hmm. And let's
So
be honest, we didn't know about some of the stuff that we know now.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just worked. That was the thing is we had this rock, it worked, and it was one of the things we didn't think about.
Hmm. Yeah.
You're talking
Which,
about rock, and you talk about this man-made rock, and I've done this before, and you can take that man-made rock and saw it open from it's been in use for years, and it looks in the inside, it looks like the day it was brand new. You take
yes.
live rock and saw it, cut it open, and you can see it's porous. And there's bacteria, bio, the very little bitty. You put it under a microscope and you can see this light that's in there. That's
Yeah.
why they call it live
Mhm.
rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big thing we're missing now, I think.
So, which brings us to the subject of filtration, and trying to keep our nutrients down. And I think one of the main things that people want to keep the nutrients down is obviously because it's healthier. The fish are healthy when you have no problems with ammonia, nitrates, and all the stuff. But at the same time, keeping your nutrients down allows the corals to the colors. It enhances the colors. Obviously it's not as simple as that. You keep the nutrients down, you got to feed the tank somewhere, and there's kind of like it's like you can't just go on a diet and stop eating. You can't do that. You go on a diet, but you have to replace it with good food. So that's what
Yeah.
you're doing with nutrients. But sometimes, when you have fish, when you have big fish, no matter what you do, the nutrients just kind of keep coming back because unlike in the ocean, there is no fresh water coming in every minute and washing off the water that's been sitting on top of the reef, and it comes in and it's completely replaced every so often. In our reef tanks, that water's there, and and if we don't filter it, all that dirt, all those detritus, all those nutrients, we just keep concentrating, and they're detrimental. So one of the things that we do to keep the phosphates down is, like Dave said, is we use GFO. Now, GFO is something that even I am not familiar with that. And that's the main reason why our very first guest on this podcast is Jeremy Meadows, because I want Jeremy to tell us, you know, the experience that you have and what makes you such a GFO expert, because I don't know anybody else that knows GFO the way you do. I had no idea that GFO was, there were many types of GFO. I thought it was just the dry stuff or the wet stuff that you get. And I don't even understand why one is white, one is white, one is dry, and the other one is wet. So we figured, Dave and I are like, hey, let's just call Jeremy and see if he can just educate us, because we want to know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so in that whole journey of mine, I one short stop, which I still do part-time to help them out, is Kohler Labs, and they do a lot with GFO. And when I was there, I learned more about GFO and carbon than I ever thought was possible. But a lot of the things with GFO is it was never meant for aquarium use. It was actually meant for water purification, of removing arsenic from water. And the gentlemen that were working on it were actually trying to get it to not absorb phosphates and silicates, because that's what it does really well. They were trying to keep it from removing that, but for us, we actually want to remove that. So that's when they were actually part of water purification. They're like, hey, these aquarium people really like this stuff. So they started doing a little more. They started expanding the brands into the aquarium industry, and started doing a lot more education of GFO. And what they also have, the GFO HC, which is high capacity GFO. They started branching out and exposing the industry to more of that. So a lot of people know GFO, which is the common product you see from a lot of different brands. It all comes from the same source in Germany, a company called Lanxess. And they produce GFO, and they actually produce GFO originally for water purification. So all the GFO that we're using in the aquarium industry is actually NSF certified, so drinking water. So it's not going to throw any harmful material, any heavy metals back into your tank, because all of this goes through NSF certification. So it is a high quality product. And the cool thing is there's technically 3 different types of GFO. 2 of them made by Lanxess, 1 of them made by Simmons, and the actual GFO is a dry product. GFO, which is E33, and then GFO high capacity, which is E33HC. They are both GFO, but they actually do different things. Regular GFO, which you see at a lot of suppliers, is actually a material that will absorb phosphate very quickly. So if you're having high phosphates, you're trying to fix an issue, that GFO E33 actually works really well for removing phosphates very quickly. GFO HC is a little bit easier to use, but it actually removes phosphates a little bit slower. So in newer tanks that you're trying to balance phosphates before it becomes an issue, in tanks that you're trying to go for that low nutrient control, a very low nutrient level, a very low phosphate level, GFOHC actually works really well for that. So you can actually help control it or fix a problem depending on what material you use. Now GFO, regular GFO, still works good for maintaining low levels, but that HC product will actually be a little bit easier to use and a little bit, I would say, probably a little bit easier to not mess up.
That's
So
what
how
I was
about
going to ask you, Jeremy, is can people damage their aquariums if they
If
overdose this, and what's the
yes,
okay?
you always want to start with either 25% or 50% dose compared to what it says in the actual instructions. Because if you strip too much phosphate too quickly, your corals aren't going to like it. You're going to have euphyllias that let go of their skeleton. You're going to have LPS that just are not happy. There's a lot of things that you can do by accidentally stripping phosphate. So it's always better to start slow than too much. Too much is sometimes not a good thing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, I wanted to go back to the E33 and the HC. And how do you know the difference? You know, because a lot of the places, do they show you what kind of carbon they are? What kind
They
of
don't. And
GFO?
there's not a bunch of sources for E33HC, high capacity.
Hmm.
It's there, it's out there, it's promoted, but the products look very different. Regular GFO is a little bit larger granule, and it's very, very bright orange red,
Okay.
to where HC is a smaller granule and it's a lot harder.
Hmm.
So with using it, it's better for reactors. It's easier not to tumble it and grade it up with the HC, but it's also a smaller crystal and it's a darker red. It's a very maroon red color. So you can definitely see the difference between the two materials. And that's one of the cool things is there's a lot of different names for it out there. There's people that label it as different things for GFO, different high capacity, ultra GFO, stuff like that. So you can actually look at the products and see kind of the difference and know what it is. And then there's actually a third product out there called GFH. And GFH is a wet product. So that goes through a different process, and that product has to stay wet. If you dry that product out, you actually lose capacity. The one thing about GFO compared to GFH is GFO, when you're buying the product, you're getting the actual true material weight. When you're buying GFH with the studies and kind of the research that Kolar did, is you're paying for 30-40% water weight with a GFH. And then on top of that, GFH also has a lot of fines. So if you put it in a reactor, you're actually losing a lot of material through fines. When you put in a reactor, those fines don't stay in the reactor. So you're either washing them down the sink or they're going all over your sump.
I was going to ask you that, and then the next question I have for that is like, is it more efficient? Is it
They're
what,
all
in
so
terms of efficiency, the wet and the dry? What is it? Because let's be honest, a lot of the in the hobby right now, it's like we always, what's the name of the brand that has the wet one? You know,
Roa Foss.
yeah, Rofa, and it has become kind of like the GFO that most people tend to think is the best. But is it really? I'm not saying if it's bad or not, but let's understand that.
they're all pretty close.
Mhm.
We actually did a study over at Kolar that we did some isotherm testing of actual intake compared to weight, compared to concentrations. And we were the first one to debunk our own product is E33HC, high capacity. Lanxess always said that it was 10 times the capacity. And it is 10 times the capacity at different concentrations. So when a lot of these manufacturers are putting together information, they're using it at capacities for drinking water. They're testing it at levels that we don't even come close to. Like if the level to get the 10x capacity out of high capacity, you would literally be dumping raw phosphate into your aquarium.
Mm.
And those levels, we're working at such the far end of the scale towards zero that they don't quite match up to what the product was originally intended for. So once we go down to the levels that we're at, the materials start acting very similar. HC, like I said, does have about twice the capacity, but it removes stuff a lot slower. GFO is a little bit cheaper, but it removes stuff very fast. So once we started balancing stuff out with cost and pricing and everything, GFO ended up being one of the better products once you start putting cost versus absorption rates into it.
Now, let me ask you, where does ROA FOS land in terms of absorption speed? Is it like HC or is it like GFO?
It's kind of in the middle.
It's in the middle. Okay.
It doesn't absorb quite as fast as regular GFO, but it is faster than HC.
Okay. All right. Now
But
let's talk about. Oh,
that was also the one thing too, is if fine material, because everything is, so how it all works is when they create the GFO, it's all about microscopic pore structure inside of the material. And that's what bonds with the phosphates and silicates in your aquarium. So the more surface area with a fine material in GFH, you're exposing the water to a lot more material. Therefore, you got a lot more surface area, so it does absorb really well in that aspect. And actually, in the drinking water world, they actually like the fines because they're put in these big pressurized vats that they push the water through it, and it's not tumbling like we do it. So for them, they actually want fines because it's more surface area.
okay.
Jeremy, I hear a lot of people say that GFO is just a rust. It's a rust
Technically, it
net,
is.
or yeah. Is
It's a
that
really
any
special rust.
okay? Can you tell us that what
It,
that is? Or,
So it literally is ferric oxide. It goes through a refining process that they get a set amount of material. They put it through an actual liquid process that makes a slurry. That slurry is then evaporated out and filtered down. And through that slurry, they actually it crystallizes and becomes the GFO granule. So technically, it is iron oxide, but it goes through a couple different refining processes to get to what we want right now.
what about when we add it to the tank and you see that rusted looking fines kind of come off into the aquarium, into the water when you first use it?
So, so we actually always recommend that you rinse the product before you use it. But that is just fine material going in the tank. And the cool thing about GFO compared to some of the other organic resins, some of the other oxides out there, is once GFO bonds with phosphate, it does not leach. So once GFO bonds with something, it's not going to
Permanent.
release it.
It's permanent.
It's permanent.
It's permanently fused.
It's safe once you're done with it. It's safe to throw away. You can throw it out in your garden for composting. It's perfectly safe to leave in the aquarium. There's some of the other phosphate removers out there that people say once it sits in the tank for a while, you start to see the material break down because it truly is breaking down and releasing. Another really popular phosphate remover out there is aluminum oxide.
Right.
And aluminum oxide works really well. It's really cheap, but it will absorb the material, and then it's going to get to a certain saturation point, and it's going to start letting it go again.
Mm.
And then that material is actually going to start breaking down in your aquarium.
So you
They're good.
recommend. So going back to this, I wanted to touch on this is the rinsing, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we cover that. So you recommend to rinse it. Do you use RO water? Can you use tap water? Can you use salt water? What do you do?
We recommend RO water. It's the
Okay,
best thing to use. You can use salt water. Tap water is kind of your last choice because you don't want to introduce any chlorine from tap water or anything in there.
gotcha.
You can do it. I mean, you're truly going to be adding so minimal of that tap water into your tank, but RO water is the best.
Okay.
It's just the best thing. It's clean. You know you're not getting anything random out of your tap. But a lot of people use tap water, and it really doesn't hurt.
Okay, so recap. So let's go to recap in here. So the way I understand it is if I'm trying to bring phosphate, a high level of phosphate down quickly because it's so high, then I want to use regular GFO.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm already down at the very close to the level that I want to be, and I just want to fine tune, then I use the GFO HC, which is the darker red color and smaller granules,
Granules.
right?
Yep.
All right. And then somewhere in the middle lands the wet GFO that everybody knows as ROA. All right.
Yep.
Now, in terms of length of how long can you run it, and I know that's a loaded question, but I know people ask
every
that question.
every tank is truly different. We say anywhere from 1 to 4 months,
Oh,
and 4 months is kind of the extreme. 1 month is kind of an extreme. The best thing to do is test your phosphate on a regular basis.
Mhm.
When you're going to watch your phosphate start to go down, you're going to stabilize out, and then do a phosphate test regularly. If you're having a problem, do it once a week. If you're just trying to maintain, do it every other week,
Mm.
or do it once a month. But what you're going to want to do is, as you start to see your phosphates creep back up, that's when you're starting to hit capacity.
Gotcha.
So put your GFO in, test your water, watch where it goes. And once you do that for a couple months and kind of get on a good schedule, you're going to know about how much your tank goes through GFO. Because every tank is truly going to be different. It depends on the amount of silicates in your water. It's going to depend on the amount of phosphate going into your water, to how you use it. And the best thing to do is test, kind of put together a little spreadsheet of, I tested here on day one, here on week one, here on week two, and just follow that graph and see where it goes. And you can start to actually just go on time, because you know how your tank's going to perform.
Now, GFO, does it really matter if you use a reactor, or can you just put her in a mesh bag, or what's the best way to do it?
So specifically on GFO, all the GFOs
Mhm.
is they will clump. Reactors are always the best way to do it.
Okay.
If you're not going to use reactors, because there are a lot of products out there that just say put GFO in a bag and throw it in your sump, it's going to clump and you're going to lose surface area. If you truly don't have a reactor, what we actually recommend is do a 2-to-1 method. Do 2 parts carbon and 1 part GFO. Put it in a bag, kind of like ChemiPure Elite. Put it in a bag, rinse it off, set it in a high flow area. That carbon's actually going to help get between the granules so it doesn't clump. So you're still putting carbon in your tank. You're still getting GFO in your tank. It's not as efficient. It's never going to be as efficient as a reactor, but it's a great way to introduce it in your tank and keep it from clumping.
Good. Now, Jeremy, we talked about GFO being efficient for phosphate removal. Does it have any bearing on nitrate?
Not really. It does have some bearing on some other heavy metals around it on the periodic table, but truly GFO is meant for phosphate removal. It works great for silicates. It works good for some of the other heavy metals. GFO, for a lot of people that don't know, is actually really good for RO systems. If you are having silicate issues with dynos and stuff like that, doing GFO as a pre-stage for your actual RO system is a great way to remove silicates in your source water.
Yeah, that's good info.
And that'll also help keep your membrane from getting gummed up with all the silicates.
So what canister would that go in, Jeremy? That would go after the
You would
pre-filter?
No, you would actually do it before the pre-filter, because you don't want the fines getting into your
Like the
membrane.
sediment. Yeah, gotcha.
So it would almost be like you would literally take a DI cartridge, and instead of being the last thing in your system, you'd make it the first thing in your system. And that's a lot of people that have issues with their anion resin depleting with RO systems. When your anion resin is depleting so much, a lot of that is silicates and phosphates getting past your membrane. And a lot of that's from the chloramines tearing up your membrane. So by doing GFO is a phenomenal sponge, and it's also a whole lot cheaper than DI resin. You put that as your pre-stage to make your membrane last longer, make your DI resin last longer, and actually see a lot better water quality.
Wow. I did not even know that. This is, been around for 20 something years, and I
We
had
still
no
learning.
idea. You're still learning.
Well, that's
Yeah.
and that's the crazy thing. Like, when I went over to Kolar to help them out and really start getting them going, I was like, okay, I'm gonna come on there as a sales rep. I'm gonna, sell some GFO, sell some carbon. And it was amazing on what I learned in that year, about year time of working full time over there. The amount of stuff I learned about carbon and GFO and biopellets, it's crazy. walking in there day one compared to when I left, I would have laughed if you would have told me I would have learned that much in 1 year.
So I got one last question. So we talked about carbon, and arguably, subjectively, people know that sometimes carbon could cause, there's been some studies, attributes, and we don't know. But some people think that carbon can cause lateral line disease in fish if you use it too
Yep.
much, especially in some fish. Is there, or are there any known um, um, things that happen when you use GFO, especially if you're using it long term, like constantly doing GFO?
We truly haven't seen anything. We've actually at Kolar, we reach out to Boomer a lot, especially when it
Okay.
comes to carbon and stuff. And we've talked a lot in that. And, honestly, we've never seen any long-term issues with GFO other than stripping phosphate.
Mm.
It's one thing that, it works well. Once it binds, it's inert and it doesn't break down.
Mm.
So that's one of the cool things. It's not as cheap as aluminum oxide, but it truly is a far superior product compared to aluminum oxide.
Definitely sounds like it.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is great, guys. So we got into the 30-minute mark. I mean, I told you it's like when you start having fun and you have this conversation, time just flies.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun. So I want to go ahead and say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Jeremy. Obviously, thank you for Dave, because Dave is making this happen. Thank you for listening. If you're listening to our podcast, you can find it on Spotify, hopefully, and we'll have it on Apple and a lot of other platforms. If you want to see our pretty faces too, then you can always go to you can always go to YouTube and watch the video. We have some images and then overlays that obviously you're not going to be able to catch while on an audio podcast. So we want to say thank you, Jeremy Meadows, and I know we're going to have you back because you brought another topic that I want to talk about, and it's carbon, because carbon is not just carbon. There are so
No,
many
it's
different things. But let's not go there.
And another topic I want to talk about,
yeah.
Carlos. Another topic I want to bring Jeremy back on for is talking about aquariums
Yes,
and build
Oh,
quality of
yeah, I know a
aquariums.
little bit about aquariums.
exactly. So let's not go there. So let's just say that Jeremy's going to be back multiple times to help
Yep.
us out in here, and that's kind of like the format we're going to have from now on. There's some shows, but it's just going to be Dave and I talking. I mean, we do have a lot of experience. We've been around
Yep.
for 25 years or plus, but we want to we want to make this podcast as educational but conversational as well. So we're going to have
Yep.
some guests. We're going to have some people that are coming in to talk to us. We may see them, and some people may just be a phone call. So it'll be the two of us with an audio. So, but please, if you have any questions, just reach out to us. If you have any questions about our product, head on over to support.coralvue.com is our website, and one of the reps will be able to help you. You can subscribe by hitting the thumbs up, or for a podcast, just subscribe to a podcast. So then your podcast software will tell you right away when we release a new episode. Thank you again for listening and watching our brand new CV TV podcast, and we will see you all next time.